Welcome to Mystery Monday. This is where we talk live about writing mysteries. My name is Zara Altair, and I'm a mystery author and writing coach. So, today we're going to talk about From Murder to Trouble in your mystery. The next 5 chapters in your mystery. Last episode we talked about the first chapter, the beginning, where you're getting your reader involved. So we introduced your reader to the detective and connected the detective with the murderer, and your detective came up with a plan to find the murderer. So the main goal in these beginning chapters is to bring the reader into your story world. Get them empathizing with your detective. Even if he's not a likable guy or gal, you still need to get your readers on your detective's side and bring them on board to follow your detective as she begins to piece out the puzzle of who the culprit is. It's just so important right at the beginning to plunge your reader into the story, get them to meet your detective, see them solving a problem, and help them understand who your detective is. So in the next 5 chapters, you're still in traditional Act 1, and you're still setting up your story. And now that your reader is hooked, you can add dimension to your story and introduce subplots like a love interest or an opponent who wants to keep your detective from succeeding on any level. So your opponent is different from the antagonist, who is the person who actually committed the murder. An opponent is someone, often in crime novels, it's either a colleague or someone higher up on the hierarchy who doesn't like your detective for whatever the reason and puts obstacles in their way. So now in these chapters is your reader's first introduction to that opponent, or to pending love interest, the first time your detective meets that person of the opposite sex. So as you expand your story, remember that conflict keeps readers reading. So whether it's the main story or a subplot, choose trouble. Make your detective work, even for the slightest clue, and expose your detective's weaknesses. This is where you get to let readers know that your detective, cool as they may be, is not perfect. So let's take a look at them. We've been using the 40 sentences story structure, and I love this story structure because it focuses on story. You're not sidetracked with trying to fit labels on the part of the story that you're writing. And so let's take a look at these on how they relate to mystery and crime fiction. So here we go. This is Bonnie Johnston's sentence for chapter 6. He leans on his usual allies and resources, but they're not enough. Even worse, the trouble he gets into triggers his flow or wound, and this new situation feels a little bit like that thing he never got over. Okay, and this is also where you can introduce your first subplot. So let's look at that from the mystery standpoint. So your detective starts working on that plan that he came up with in chapter 5, but the plan doesn't work. He may be deterred by a rival or a superior who wants things done their way, not your detective's way. And for those of you who studied plot, this is the first complication. All right, then chapter 7. As Bonnie says, taking a step back, literally or metaphorically, your protagonist tries to figure out how he lost control of the situation. He might go looking for advice, or advice might come looking for him, but either way, his misbelief prevents him from understanding it. And also, this is where you can introduce a second subplot. And I know I've mentioned this before, but I really suggest that you have no more than 2 subplots, especially when you're a beginning writer starting out. That's going to give you 3 story arcs to get through in your novel. So just be aware that 2 is a high limit on subplots. Your focus in the story is going to be on the mystery at hand. So let's take a look at this chapter from the perspective of mystery writing. So your detective takes a look at his original plan to see if he can spot the error. A suspect or a new suspect gives him a piece of new information that seems like good advice or a new insight into the murder victim, and the detective meets a member of the opposite sex, if you're doing love interest, who is some combination of intriguing, sexy, smart, and so unlike your detective as the attraction doesn't work. But still, okay. So for plot students, this is the aftermath of the first complication. By now you've probably guessed that I'm not into labels. I'm into story creation. So I really love these 40 sentences because they go away from labeling and trying to figure out which part of the label you're working on now, but getting you focused on moving your story forward. That's the fun part of writing. All right, so chapter 8. Realizing it's time to pull out what he thinks are the big guns, your protagonist does something that he would normally consider to be a last-ditch effort to get his life back on track. But instead, whatever he tries ends up backing him into a corner. And then also you can add, you can continue on with your first subplot here. This is a good place to get that opponent, giving him some real trouble. So your detective latches on to a clue or suspect and thinks he has the answer. And he may even take a risk to prove his point. Instead, the mystery becomes more mysterious. And to add insult to injury, the detective opponent wins a minor triumph. So we're going to even emphasize even more your detective's weak points, shortcomings, whatever those are. Because if you've done your job at the beginning, your reader is on board with your detective, and they're going to feel the frustration of this shortcoming just as much as your detective. So, still loving those plot labels. This is a minor dark moment. All right, chapter 9. The protagonist. He might have a moment of false success before he finds himself stuck outside his comfort zone, exposed and vulnerable. Maybe he wasn't expecting there to be a twist here. He's made his situation 10 times worse, and none of his usual allies can or will help him. Your detective blunders along on her discovery path and even makes a find that seems to lead her closer to the killer. But everything, especially the new discovery, is not as it first seems, and a step forward sets your detective back. So we're really in this part of the setup, we're really getting your detective unfocused from the plan. The plan that he or she came up with in chapter 5 is try as hard as your detective might. It's just not working. All right, and then so for this chapter, chapter 9, for plot aficionados, this is the setup for the first plot point. Okay, so chapter 10. Here's Bonnie's description. Maybe he has no choice, or maybe they're all bad choices. Either way, your protagonist has to choose between letting his everyday world become intolerable or stepping into uncharted, for him, territory. He commits to entering the extraordinary world. Alright, so from the perspective of writing a mystery, all your detective's choices so far have led him down a false path. People around him, even friends, seem to get in his way, and he pulls back. Takes a look, examines his previous action, and starts down a new path. So this is your last chapter in the first act, and you've really covered a lot of territory by now. You brought your reader into the story, introduced your detective, got your detective involved in solving the mystery of the murder, and then your detective comes up with a plan, and then with that plan, which is based on all of it, his or her, their repertoire, as it were, the plan doesn't work. The plan just doesn't work. So in this chapter, chapter 10, if you're a plot freak, this is it. The first plot point. This is the first turning point, getting your detective out of old habits and into a new perspective on solving the mystery. So once again, we're going to just keep doing this for a while with the chapters and walking through, because I love the 40 sentences so much, and I think it frees up writers, especially beginning writers who are struggling with all the advice that's out there and people's, perfect plot, beat, whatever, ways of doing things. And it takes writers away from the story to trying to crunch things into this set label, and I think it makes it complicates things and makes it harder for beginning writers to write when they want to focus on this story. Most people who start writing a story are writing for the story, and I believe these 40 sentences really help people along in staying with the story. And one of the things that this does is eliminate things that happen with new writers a lot, which is scenes that don't move the story forward, long descriptive passages. If you're focused on moving the story forward and telling the story in these ways and knowing what happens in each chapter, it's a lot easier to keep from being sidetracked or going off on a wrong path. So using the 40 sentences is the fastest way to plan a story without spending time trying to slap a label on each sequence. I just truly believe this. I know when I first read the 40 sentences, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so brilliant. It's just so brilliant. And anybody who's known me for a while knows that my focus is story. So, and that's what these 40 sentences do. Your writing focus is on the story, not matching plot points or beats or any other story structure to your planning process. And if you're struggling with trying to fit pieces of your story into a framework, just try using the 40 sentences to make your story flow. All right, and so I will have, once again, link in the show notes to the 40 sentences so you can see all of them, and you're perfectly free to copy them and use them for your own. And this is because Bonnie Johnston has generously shared them with the writing community. Okay, so once again, if you're just joining, this is Mystery Monday, and my name is Zara Altair, and we've just talked about chapters 5 through 10 in your mystery novel and what goes into each chapter. And now we're at Ask Me Anything questions. So I welcome your questions. You can send them to me anytime during the week. You can connect with me on Facebook or send me an email at zara@zaraaltair.com and ask your question, and I will answer it on Mystery Monday. Okay, so first question for today. One of my characters isn't a suspect, but they have an important clue. Does this work? Well, yes, of course this works. But you need to remember to use your craft to weave that character into the story in an organic way. You can't just have somebody from out of the blue show up and say, okay, here's the clue, and then disappear for the rest of the story. You need to figure out in your planning process, when you're creating your character Bible, you want to make sure that this character has a role over and above just this one clue or piece of information that they give to your detective. Somehow make them relate to the whole story other than just giving that clue. Especially for beginning writers, it's easy to have too many characters in your story. You want to focus on solving the puzzle of the mystery rather than adding a whole bunch of interesting, however interesting they may be, a whole bunch of interesting characters. So you want to think about how your detective meets your character, and if that character has an ongoing role in the story. So if you don't see an ongoing role for that character in the story, then my suggestion is that you think about using a different character to share that information. It's always your personal choice as a writer and story creator, but extra characters can be distracting. So just keep a rein on extra characters and see if you can find a way to integrate that piece of information within the whole entire story. Okay, I hope that helps. All right. Next question. I'm feeling like my mystery isn't epic. It's 140,000 words. Is this a good length? Okay, so there are mysteries that are 140,000 words long. So it's going to be your choice about staying with length of your story. However, just to give you a little background, Mysteries in the days of Agatha Christie were pretty short. They were from 40 to 60,000 words, which is less than half of what you have now. And these days, readers look for something a bit longer than those early stories, but generally they're 80 to 90,000 words. That's kind of the going length of marketable selling mysteries these days. So you want to keep that in mind. 140,000 words isn't out of the question, but you need to be really, really solid and make sure that everything in your mystery is about the mystery. So I haven't read your story, and from your question, it feels like you've written a traditional mystery. So try going through the story with some basic mystery tropes in mind. So are your suspects limited to 5 to 8 at the very most? If you've got 20 suspects, you need to take a good look at your story and combine those suspects and get them down to 8 maximum. That's something that happens a lot with new mystery writers. There's all these interesting characters they want to throw into the story. I think you should save some for your next mystery. And so that's one place where you may be able to integrate your story and reduce the word count. And just once again, more than 5 to 8 suspects confuses your reader. It doesn't make it more mysterious. It just makes it confusing, and they're going, if you're introducing 20 characters, they're like, okay, was that the character that X, or was that the character that... So you... Writing a good story, including mysteries, is about keeping your reader engaged. And anytime you give the reader a problem reading your story, it's a potential for them to stop reading your story. So my suggestion is that if that's something that's happening in your mystery, you really work on reducing the number of suspects. As I said, I haven't read your story, so I don't know, but that is something that happens quite frequently, so that's why I mention it. And if you feel you have a solid story and you don't know where to start by trimming it down, at this point I really suggest hiring a content editor to help you with the storyline. That is what content editors do. They look at your story, the components of your story, the characters in your story, how the story flows, and how the story works out. And they should be able to give you some quite pertinent, a good content editor understands story. So they should be able to give you some very good pointers on how you can trim your story down from 140,000 words, say, to 90,000 words, and make it simpler for you so it won't be confusing. So books of 140,000 words do appeal to readers. So the number itself isn't necessarily bad, but for a wide reader appeal, if that's what you're looking for, you really want to market your story, I would think about editing for a smooth read. Okay, super. That's it for today's Mystery Monday, and thanks very much for joining me. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, especially now as we're going to be marching through the entire 40 sentences. So next week we're going to look at the next 5, chapters 11 through 15. And thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next week.